Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. As the teams complete their analysis of the Bahrain test, yet more positivity around the true performance picture of that Ferrari SF26. Loic also implies the inverted rear wing, which they debuted for about 5 laps to absolute uproar, will be back on the car in due course as well, with the car in terms of tyre degradation looking the strongest out of anyone based on the Bahrain data. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, it officially says Round 1 Australia in the bottom right hand corner of the video. We are not long away from the debut of this season. Few updates before we get there. Williams, some sources internally suggest they are not 20 kilograms overweight, which is good or bad depending on your opinion. There have been rumours that they were 20 to 30 kg overweight, which would equate to probably a seconds of lap time that they're losing just on that ends. They weren't especially competitive in Bahrain. Yes, they lost a lot of running because they didn't get to turn up in Barcelona because they were delayed. They failed all the crash tests and all of that. But there was a feeling that, okay, once they get the weight out of the car, they'll be in a better spot. That remains true. I think it's quite likely that Williams are the heaviest car on the grid right now. Maybe the Aston Martin, who really knows? The McLaren is also not light either. We'll discuss that in the coming minutes. But they are relatively close and they will get there near enough. The idea would be if you take the weight out of the car, all of a sudden the Williams is looking pretty good. But if it's not actually as heavy as some suggested, then they don't have easy performance to unlock by just creating lighter parts that still pass the relevant crash tests. We'll see if Williams can deliver on some of the expectations this year. The expectations, however, for Aston Martin were in many respects higher, and it's a quite remarkable statement that Chinchero makes here, which effectively says the only reason why they're turning up to Australia is because they have to. They know that it's going to be a complete shambles. They would prefer not to even go and save the money and wait until hopefully some improvements arrive in the very near future. But they are not expecting much out of Australia, let's just put it that way. We must keep in mind the 107% rule. It's not been a key talking point. The only time we ever talk about this rule, effectively what this is that during a qualifying session, if you are not within 107% of, I think it's the fastest time in Q1 actually, yeah, it says that. So it's not to the pole time, so it's actually even easier. But in recent seasons, this hasn't been a talking point, apart from when a team doesn't get a lap in qualifying because they crashed or red flags or whatever the case is, and therefore they say, oh, well, it's fine, you can still race because you were within the limits based on your practice time. This season, who knows? But 7% over the fastest Q1 time is a big gap, right? At the Red Bull Ring, the shortest track of all, based on 2025 times, which will be quicker than this year, so these numbers will actually be higher, you would imagine, than listed here, you need to be within 4.5 seconds around Australia. That is a short track. It only takes you a minute roughly to get round there. Melbourne, you're talking 5.3 seconds. Spa, you're talking more like 7.1. So Melbourne, Aston Martin need to be within 5 seconds roughly of the fastest time in Q1 to pass the test. I don't think they should have an issue with that. The issue they're going to have is actually finishing the race, which I think is why they don't even want to go. Cadillac, they're probably going to be seconds off the pace rather than tenths of seconds, but they will be within 107%. So at least that is some level of respectability. It's a challenging sport here in Formula 1. However, the reason why they don't even want to go to Australia, but they do want to go to the upcoming rounds, is because Honda is said to be improving reliability and unlocking more power, ideally by China, for the latest by Japan. So that is the timeline. But again, do Aston Martin really trust what Honda have to tell them, given there's been some discussion on whether they didn't really deliver on their promises and expectations in aligning what they said they would be able to achieve with what Newey wanted out of the car? Now, there is this balance of performance discussion. I wouldn't call it BOP, as is in the World Endurance Championship, which is where they literally add weight to cars that are faster to try and make everything equal. I don't like that. I don't think many F1 teams like that idea either. But we do have the ability for teams that are further behind to effectively spend more to catch up. That's okay as far as I'm concerned, as long as it's still a meritocracy at the top level. So if you are outside of 2%, you get more development and upgrade opportunity. Now, that is measured over the first 6 races. The numbers are actually as follows. So if you're 2% outside, you get an extra 3 million. If you're 4% outside, you get an extra 8 million to spend on this. And that's a pretty big deal. We think Honda are going to be about 5% off the pace. So that's how we currently understand it. Couple of updates as well for you all on Drive to Survive. I know that some of you guys probably watch this, some of you guys may not, but it is a key talking point every year in Formula 1. They come out with this today because it's debuting relatively soon. These are the 8 episodes of the season. This is what they are about, just out of interest. So the first one is about the rookies. There's been quite a lot of drama about this today. Lots of reporting in the press from people who have already seen some of the episodes discussing whether they really hit the nail on the head, whether this year it was too corporate, whether they avoided many storylines that they could have discussed for PR-related reasons. We'll get to that in a second. The first episode is about the rookies. The second one is on Jack Doohan and Liam Lawson and that drama early on in the season. Then they talk about papaya rules, at least to a certain extent. They discuss the priority, but they're talking about Canada mainly here. And there was a feeling today, based on some of the reporting I saw, they don't really get into the Norris, Piastri, papaya rules, Piastri end of season collapse, Baku, etc., as much as arguably they should, given like that was the story of the championship in many ways. The other story of the season, which with a fantastic episode title, I will say, episode 4, A Bull with No Horns, about Christian Horner's departure from the team and all the associated drama. Hülkenberg gets his podium, Williams, Sainz on the podium as well. That's a nice story to do an episode around. And then the final 3 episodes about the end of the season, Norris and Verstappen dueling it out, closing the gap to championship leader Piastri. So again, how much focus is on Piastri, how much focus on Verstappen Norris? I just wonder how they will portray all this, because you know what Drive to Survive is like. I do wonder whether it will feel a little different to how things actually played out. Then they talk about Vegas, the double disqualification, and the final one, Call Me Chucky, is about Max taking the title charge all the way to Abu Dhabi. So, you know, it's nice that they can finish out the season with an actual championship finale, which we'd not had in some time. But there was lots of drama hitting the press today about these comments that the drivers had made in the show. Doohan reveals that for Miami, he was getting I mean, we knew about this, but it's interesting to hear him say it. He had serious death threats, people telling him that they would be cutting his limbs off, and when he turned up to to the race, he had armed guards and all this. This is effectively because some Colapinto fans wanted him in the car instead, and, you know, as expected, took it way too far on occasion. Doohan said it was kind of a shame, obviously, but he was like, I dreamed all my life of being in Formula 1. This is meant to be the pinnacle. I'm meant to enjoy every moment as much as I can, but instead it was entirely the opposite scenario for him. Christian Horner talked a few things as well and said, when he got sacked, I felt a real sense of loss and hurt. It was all rather sudden. I didn't get a chance to say a proper goodbye. George Russell also, we believe, in these episodes, comments on this as well. Now, let's not forget, Russell's team boss, Toto Wolff, was openly courting Max Verstappen. He was spotted on his yacht in Sardinia during the summer break or whatever it was. Russell, though, says and implies that he thinks it was the Verstappens that got Horner gone. As far as we understand from the talking that we did on it at the time, Max Verstappen was relatively impartial around Christian Horner. Jos Verstappen did not like him and would prefer him to go. Jos even came out to the press and said if Horner stays, the team will implode. And, well, Horner's job eventually imploded. So Russell says the Verstappens have a lot of power at that team. They like to manipulate situations, and says they don't like Horner and they are trying to get him out. I wonder if this whole Verstappen to Mercedes thing is a play to put pressure on Red Bull that he will only continue there if Christian is gone. So, look, he might be right, but that also might just be Russell's way of justifying the idea that actually Toto kind of wants Max instead of him. At least it felt like that for a time. I don't imagine that, Toto was in on this grand conspiracy. But George says they want him gone. However, there were other interpretations because Horner actually spoke about this as well and apparently said, I don't believe that the Verstappens were responsible in any way after Dietrich's death. I think I probably was deemed to have too much control. And again, Horner in that comment is playing a little bit of victim. And, obviously we know what's happened over the last couple of years. But also, I think Horner tried to grab some control, right? It wasn't just like, he's now got too much control. I think Horner was also playing the same game. And, when you're jousting with a rival, someone's going to get hurt. And Horner says that it was Marco who got him gone. My immediate reaction, we actually saw those comments earlier. I think it was a decision by Mintzlaff with advice from Helmut Marko from the sideline. So there we go. Good bit of drama continuing. Marco and Horner, that great rivalry that we saw over the last couple of years internally at Red Bull, which caused a load of problems. Well, Marco got the last laugh for now. But of course, it does mean that Horner and Marco, two very entertaining characters that we talked a lot about on this channel over the last couple of years, are no longer in Formula One, at least for the time being. And, well, Toto Wolff says that as well. And after Horner was dismissed, Toto texted him and said this: I didn't know what to say because on one hand you've been a complete jerk, but on the other hand, the sport will miss one of its main protagonists. Who shall I fight against, right? And love to hate, as you've said. We won 14 of the last 15 championships. That's not bad. And Horner says, I've loved facing off against you all these years. Thanks for the rivalry, the competition and the pressure. Nobody came close to us. The stats show it. I wish you the best for the future. So look, it's only a matter of time until Horner gets back into Formula One. In what capacity we will see. But there were some reviews of Drive to Survive that said the following: it feels a bit too PR happy, too refined, too polished. Various PR departments don't want something shown. I think this is the key one, right? The discussion on Silverstone to a degree, the penalty there and the comments on the radio, but certainly Hungary, Italy, and then Singapore was a big one, as we know, that early race incident there. I don't know how much those are going to be discussed because apparently McLaren really tried to dull this down to a great extent. Piastri's crumbling in the final stages of the championship fight is also completely ignored, which again is one of the key storylines. So Baku onwards, that deserves a lot of discussion. And yeah, Piastri picked it up again towards the end, but he did have a horrible stint while Verstappen came through and Norris found his footing. So, yeah, I don't know, not expecting all that much. There was other reporting as well that said the papaya battle is covered up until Silverstone, but then after that, as I say, all those races that I mentioned, what happened in Austin, the first lap of the sprint, as I say, Singapore, among others, very important rounds in the context of the season, apparently don't really get covered. So, yeah, and they discuss it here. Piastri's 10-second penalty is covered, but there's no interrogation of the charges of favouritism in Monza or in Qatar and the pit stop strategy and all that type of stuff. So, yes, again, probably not delivering what we would like to see, but it's Drive to Survive. You've got to take it as you will. Let's talk about Ferrari, because Mercedes and Ferrari are unanimously considered the two strongest teams going into Melbourne. I think everyone thinks Mercedes are the favourites, which is seemingly justified on their consistency in Bahrain and the feeling that they left a lot of performance on the table. But now that we've had a few days for people to go away and do endless analysis on the data, you can come up with some interesting solutions, especially because there are so many variables that it's tough to have takeaways, but what you do know is track conditions, and you can see average stint times and tyre degradation and these other factors which are critical, because let's not forget last year's Ferrari was a dog in the pre-season test. It couldn't put more than 5-10 laps together without having massive tyre deg, and that was the problem that carried them through the entire season. This year, a very different story so far. Loic Serra, of course, who followed Hamilton over from Mercedes, they came at a similar time, of course, in the technical department, worked with Hamilton for many years, says, look, yes, we've got a good car now. Well, he doesn't exactly say that, but they do. The point is, it's not important. What matters is how we develop from here. Loic Serra was also asked to comment on this exhaust feature and why it's very interesting. The crux of the matter is, you cover half the exhaust with this plate, you force the air from the exhaust upwards, that drags the air behind upwards as well, generating more performance in the diffuser. You can even see, there's some, steam that comes out of the back here. You can actually see it getting dragged upwards in all of the images. So it is interesting to see that come into play. No other team has come up with this idea. And that is because it's very, very challenging to copy. That was discussed by the guys at the race, where they talk about exactly why they've been able to do this where other teams haven't. So effectively, it's an extension of the diffuser by using this plate here. And to achieve that, I thought it was to do with the pylons. It's actually to do with the positioning of the rear differential as it is connected to the rear gearbox. So there's an aerodynamic legality box which exists connected to where the differential is. There's a 60mm kind of choice that the teams can make on this front as to where they put it. Ferrari have gone as rearward as possible, which extends that legality box further rearward, giving them the opportunity to create this device which covers up half the exhaust and gives them aerodynamic performance. The guys discussed that this is actually a pretty big deal. This isn't like a small improvement. It's not a blown diffuser exactly. It's not a double diffuser. It's not going to give huge lap time, but it is going to be a big gain. I mean, there was talk that they could gain 2-3 tenths at least from something like this, and that's a big deal for something that other teams cannot copy, apart from Haas, because Haas, they took everything from Ferrari, but Cadillac only take the power unit, so it doesn't seem to have gone for the same thing. So Haas also could introduce the same thing, but of course they shouldn't be a main Ferrari competitor, but based on the location of the gearbox, it restricts other teams from doing this, and the guys describe how there should be downforce benefits had in many types of corners. This is not just a small improvement. The other big note that Loic Serra had was on this rear wing. The absolutely fascinating inverted rear wing that they unveiled for just a few laps and then they put it away and they said, oh, we were just testing it. But I would be very, very surprised if this wing, or at least some form of it, doesn't appear on the car at some point. They've actuated the wing in the sides, which already feels like potentially a pretty big advantage that they could gain whatever they decide to do. But also this element here, generating some lift, taking some of the pressure off those rear tyres, potentially could aid in their, let's say tyre management over the course of a race stint, but also it gives you a massive slot gap, more so than other teams have, which should generate more straight line speed. It has its pros, it has its cons. It takes quite a while to actually move between the two positions, so when you're in this position you get an air brake effect, which there was some talk about this air brake being a positive, like for example when you're switching back as it helps you slow the car down, but you don't really want it. You'd prefer to do all the braking through the MGUK and regenerate battery power, right? You don't want this, I wouldn't imagine anyway. I'm not an aerodynamicist. So it has its pros and its cons, is the point. But Loic Serra says, the previous rules didn't give us the flexibility on this. We saw the opportunity to maximize straight line speed and make better use of the airflow, and we took it. There's also been talk of how it connects to the, let's say, point at the back of the car here with the diffuser. Because there was some discussion that, well, because it kicks up the exhaust gases, it actually interferes with the rear wing and reduces the performance. But imagine that you now invert that top element. You actually get a really interesting airflow where that airflow will hit that rear wing exactly as you want it to. It wouldn't interfere, it would actually bounce off it and fire off backwards, which is how you want it to interact. So I think those two ideas are at least to some degree designed in parallel, and just the fact that Serra says that we saw the opportunity and we've taken it, that implies to me they're not just going to leave this on the scrap heap, right? Unless whatever they saw in the test just wasn't anywhere near what they expected, but it would be a surprise if they leave this. So we'll see what happens on the car for Australia, whether this is the version they bring out, whether they need to do some other things. It is apparently legal. The FIA supposedly have said, yeah, this is fine. There were some discussions about it needs to fail in its standard position. So if it was to fail, it would need to invert back to the traditional position because for safety reasons, you need the more downforce if there was to be an incident. But maybe they have a solution for that. That's the current discussion. But it's not just about their innovations and why they're going to be difficult to copy. It's also just about the pace of the car. So the guys at Auto Race have put together a very interesting article. I'll leave a link down below as always. Just one screenshot I took from it here was about the Ferrari degradation. So Ferrari's degradation, they looked into the numbers basically. As we've had a few days after the test now, everyone has analysed all of the numbers through all of the different tests they did, looked at the track conditions at the time, the temperature of the track, and tried to come up with some sort of analysis on how these cars handle their tyres, which is a key component, as we always know, in Formula 1. On the C3, their deg was a high number, but not inconsistent with higher asphalt temperatures. But on the C2 and the C1, actually just on the C2, let's say, they had very, very low degradation, the Ferrari. It means that on the C2 tyre, which will be the harder or the medium depending on the track that we go to, the regression curve of that tyre was effectively flat. There was no cliff at all on Ferrari's tyres, and of all of the teams, it seemed that they were handling their tyres the best. These were some other bullet points to rip out of the article. They did also discuss how McLaren looks like the heaviest car, but when you look at the Red Bull degradation and the McLaren degradation, it wasn't as good as Mercedes or Ferrari. And again, track conditions varied. They said something interesting about Red Bull in the article, actually, which said that they were on track at a much lower temperature, but had similar degradation to what you would expect to have at, let's say, a 44-degree track temperature. So there was a feeling that Red Bull's tyre management isn't as strong. McLaren seems okay, but it might be affected by the car being heavier than others. Mercedes apparently on the first couple of days didn't look as good, but by the end of the test, they were pretty much in the same ballpark as Ferrari. But the takeaway in the final few lines of the article basically said, on this front, Ferrari appeared to be the team to beat. Now, of course, there are so many other factors. Power is one. How much more power do Mercedes have in reserve? That's a question we don't currently have the answer to. But we do believe, based on the analysis here that's been done, that Ferrari are in a very strong position when it comes to tyre management and consistency. To be fair, the Mercedes lap times felt more, they were more consistent. Antonelli and Russell were putting in stints within a tenth, half a tenth, lap by lap, which was very impressive. The Ferrari stints weren't quite as consistent, but when you average everything out, you find that their degradation was the same, if not better, and certainly better than anyone else. And that's a strong start for Ferrari, because also their single lap pace is also good. The single lap pace is tough to judge. We don't know how much more Mercedes had in the tank and all this, but Leclerc was the fastest man at the end of the weekend. Hamilton was the fastest man at the end of Barcelona. So they do have some single lap pace, that's for sure. And they do have good performance over race stints. That is also for sure. So Ferrari have both sides of the equation. Could they have an SF24 on their hands again? Not quite as strong in qualifying, but much better and stronger in race conditions. Possibly, but again, time will only tell. The hype train left the station a long time ago, and it is keeping on rolling. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.